evening and welcome. Thank you for attending the 2019 Noyce Summit, the role of teacher preparation in STEM teacher retention in high-need school districts. This event is co-hosted by the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the National Science Foundation. My name is Jennifer Carinci, and I am a program director for STEM education research, and I have the pleasure of leading AAAS's Noyce grant efforts to support and provide community for Noyce practitioners and researchers through virtual and in-person events like today. As the world's largest scientific society, AAAS seeks to advance science, engineering, and innovation throughout the world for the benefit of all people. Two of the goals through which AAAS advances our mission are to strengthen and diversify the science and technology workforce and to foster education in science and technology for everyone. Nowhere is the impact of these goals more tangible than in the type of work that the people in this room do every day as equity in STEM education and workforce development opportunities starts with effective and evidence-based teacher preparation. And the better able we are to prepare and retain effective teachers, the better the odds of increasing positive outcomes for our next generation of STEM professionals. So let's pause here to get a sense of who's in the room here today. So please stand if you are a pre-service STEM teacher. And please remain standing pre-service STEM teachers, and also stand if you are a current STEM teacher in a K-12 setting. When browsing the program and handouts for this summit, look for the Apple icon that you see on the screen for sessions that may be of particular interest to our current and aspiring teachers, for content that's tailored to our scholars and fellows, though everyone is welcome to attend any session of interest. Thank you. Please stand if you're a teacher educator. Please stand if you're an administrator. Stand if you're an evaluator. How about our researchers? And if you're a supporter of students' STEM development. Thank you for all the work that you do as an aspiring or current STEM teacher, teacher educator, administrator, evaluator, researcher, and/or supporter of student STEM development, as many of you fill more than one of these critical roles. Registration data for tonight's event indicate that there are approximately 300 unique institutions of higher education represented in the audience today, and almost 350 unique organizations. So thank you for bringing this diverse group together. So now for more sustained audience participation, please follow us at @Noyce Program and use the hashtag Noyce2019 to share your thoughts and learning. Every tweet that you send will be entered into a drawing to randomly win swag. Drawings for prizes will occur at each of the remaining plenaries, so start your tweeting engines. There's a lot of teachers have a do now on the board when they come in. You have a tweet now up there for those of you who are already ready, what are you most looking forward to at hashtag Noyce 2019? Please let us know on Twitter. So it is my honor to introduce our fearless NSF program lead, Sandra Richardson. She is the program lead for the Noyce program. Prior to her permanent assignment at the National Science Foundation, she served as Associate Professor of Mathematics and Mathematics Education at Virginia State University. Her research is in developing pedagogical content knowledge for pre-service teachers, an effective means of diversifying the STEM teacher pipeline. She brings her expertise in teacher professional development and broadening participation efforts to the Noyce program. Please welcome Sandra Richardson.
Good evening, everyone. It's been a long day, but you give me energy, so I don't even feel like I've been here all day. It is such a delight to be able to kick off our 2019 Noyce Summit, and thank you all so much for being in attendance. Especially as I look out into the audience from this perspective, it's just such a joy to see the various institutions, to see the various types of folks that stood up when Jennifer did the roll call. And we're just looking forward to a very engaging and fruitful and beneficial 2 days during this year's summit. Thank you. Okay, so as you know by now, you've picked up your program booklets, and you know by now that the theme for this year's summit is the role of teacher preparation and STEM teacher retention in high-need school districts. So I want you to just sit with that for a moment if you haven't done so yet, to kind of get us in the right framework for kicking off the summit and what we'll experience over these next two days. So certainly the theme this year will be STEM teacher retention, right? We tend to put lots of focus and lots of efforts on recruitment efforts, preparation efforts, but I want to encourage us today as we begin the summit to put equal amount of effort on our retention efforts, right? We can recruit them and prepare them, but we must retain them. And so that is one of the goals of this year's summit, to help us begin conversations around what we as teacher educators, what we as policymakers, what we as STEM teachers in high-need school districts need to be doing to kind of think more about this retention issue. And so I hope you're looking forward to the summit as I am. Before I continue, I'm sure you all are aware to put on any event takes an enormous amount of work, and the summit in particular takes months and months of planning. And so I certainly want to thank AAAS for hosting this event with the National Science Foundation support, and there are many folks on the AAAS staff who's contributed to this. And if you all could just stand for just a moment, I won't do any names, but certainly want to recognize you and thank you for the arduous work that you've done for months in planning for the summit. So thank you all. In addition to the AAAS staff, I'm so privileged and so honored to work with just an immensely talented group of folks at the National Science Foundation that really make the Noyce program what it is. And so I want to take a moment and introduce my colleagues and other members of our Noyce program team so that you get an opportunity to match faces with names. Oftentimes in the space that we work in, we do a lot of our communications electronically or via phone, and it's always a delight to put a name with a face. And so I want to take a moment to introduce my NSF colleagues, and if you all could just stand and wave when I call your name, that'll be great. And we'll hold applauses to the end because I know you love everyone, but we don't want to be here all night. So I'll start with my colleague Kathleen Bergen, who is the co-leader of the Robert Noyce program, a biologist by training and permanent program officer at the National Science Foundation. So Kathleen's here. My colleague Andrea Nixon, who is a rotator from Carleton College, where she's the Director of Educational Research, NSF Program Officer. My colleague Talitha Washington. Talitha, I don't know where you are, but Talitha's in the very back of the room. And Talitha's a mathematician from Howard University, a rotator at the National Science Foundation. Karen King, my colleague Karen King, is a math educator on loan to us from North Carolina State University. Steve Turley, Steve is in the back of the room as well, a physicist from Brigham Young University. Tamara Floyd Smith, who is on this side of the room. Tamara is an engineer, rotator from Tuskegee University. And my colleague Jennifer Lewis. Oh, sorry, Jennifer. Jennifer is right behind Tamara. Jennifer is a chemist from University of South Florida, and on loan to us from University of South Florida. And so we make up the Noyce program officer team, and so each of our Noyce projects in the room, hopefully you know who your Noyce program officer is, and certainly we encourage you to engage in conversation with us while we're here at the summit. But in addition to us, we have a lot of other folks who help with many aspects of the Noyce team, and so I'll mention our division director and deputy division director, Robin Wright and Lee Zia, will be here tomorrow at the summit. Lee will actually be moderating the panel, so I encourage you all to also communicate with them. Cammie Newmeyer, who is our Einstein Fellow this year, and we're just delighted to have an Einstein Fellow with the Noyce program, has done a lot of work in terms of helping us organize the poster and workshop sessions, and had a fabulous, I hear, speed stemming event with the Noyce scholars this evening. Thank you, Cammie. And then we have Jack Butler and Glenda Valdez, who are our science assistants in the division. Jack was here earlier. I'm not sure if he's still here. Oh, in the very back of the room, great. And then Daphne Marshall and Nate Smith will be here tomorrow, who are also on our program team. So that was a mouthful. Thank you, NSF team, for all that you do, certainly. But most importantly, we just want you to be able to put names with faces. And please, please, we're all approachable, and we love to engage in conversation with the community, and especially with our projects. So please do reach out to us while we're here at the summit. Jennifer did a wonderful job with the roll call, so I'm going to skip that slide and move to this slide to help us sort of get in the right space as we think about the summit. So your task will be to fill in the blank. So I believe the 2019 summit blank, and you fill in the blank, I don't know, should be transformative, should help me become a better teacher educator, should play a role in whatever. So let's take 30 seconds. You fill in the blank and then find 2 people to tell what you filled in the blank with. In our room of a few hundred, let's just take, I don't know, 3 or 4. So I believe the 2019 summit blank. The mics are on the floor. If just a couple people want to share what their fill in the blank is, that'll be great. If not, I know many of you, and so I'll encourage you to go to the mic. And we don't have a whole lot of time. They're going to put me off the stage in a second, so.
I'll be first from South Carolina. I believe that 2019 Noyce Summit is as a math educator in the classroom. This is to help me network and see what goes on outside of the classroom, all the work, the research that I can bring back to my classroom and make it better.
Perfect. I'm a former teacher. I have great wait time. Great wait time.
Vicente Carreras, Aztec for Life, SCSU. I believe the 2019 Noyce Summit will be energizing and motivating.
Great, wonderful. All right, let's take 2 more. Just shout out from your seat since you all are afraid of the mic. Come on, yeah, great.
Hi, Deirdre Riley, Staten Island, New York. PS 22. We're looking, I believe the Noyce Summit this year will be exciting, fun, and very informative and helpful for elementary school teachers, since we really need to up our game in science.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Full sentence there. Great, thank you. All right, let's do a couple shout outs. What fill in the blank, adjective, one word maybe. Collaborative, great. Fun, great. Supportive, inspiring. Ambitious? Contagious. All right, I misheard the ambitious part, okay. Somebody said something over here? Connects. Collaborative again? All right, all great. So anyway, the point is I want you all to start thinking about, you know, what role you can play in the summit, what role others can play in the summit, what do you want to get out the summit? Because, of course, for us all to get something out, we need to put something in, right? And so we're hopeful that you leave here a different educator, you leave here a different fellow scholar, you leave here a different researcher, and that you've gained something when you leave the summit. So certainly please keep that in mind. I'm not going to go through the goals of the summit in great detail. They're in your program book. But remember, our theme is on retention this year, and certainly as a part of that, what we hope to do in this summit space is to identify some evidence-based strategies of STEM teacher preparation that have contributed to really successful STEM teacher retention efforts. There is some literature and research out on this particular area, but not enough. And so we want to dig a little deeper to find out what are those evidence-based practices. Additionally, we're interested in looking at strategies that help the STEM teacher preparation programs to actually strengthen the partnerships with other districts, with state education agencies, and policy agencies with regard to the STEM teacher retention issue in the workforce, with specific interest, of course, being in high-need school districts. And so I encourage you all to think about, again, you know, what are your professional or personal goals for this year's summit, and especially framing that in this teacher retention space, right? So what are your goals in terms of STEM teacher retention? And that goes back to maybe your role at your institution or the role at your particular school. And how will you use this summit experience to actually impact or move the needle in this STEM teacher retention space? So as we move through the summit, I encourage you to keep those two questions in mind. And as I close, I'll just talk a little bit, just very briefly, about what we know nationally. This is what we already know. And so we certainly want to think about, based on, if this is what we know, what can we do to address some of these challenges? So we know that recruitment is really not the problem. Perhaps in certain areas, especially high-need school districts, that is a problem, but recruitment of STEM teachers is not really the issue. The issue is retaining the teachers that we recruit. So when we look at the pipeline, we're bringing STEM teachers in, but we're not keeping them. And so we need to look closer, and this is part of the Noyce program's efforts, in fact, especially in our Track 4 work, at what are some characteristics that are keeping teachers and what are characteristics that are moving them away from the STEM classroom, especially in high-need school districts. We know that certain schools and certain districts in particular find it very challenging to find qualified teachers, right? We know that rural schools have this challenge, especially when we talk about STEM teachers. We know that high minority populated schools have this challenge. We know that high poverty schools have this challenge. And we know that oftentimes, especially in the schools that I just mentioned, it's a real challenge to find a teacher body that is reflective of the student body, right? And so we need to look at, if we're talking about recruitment as well as retention, you know, are we really recruiting the teachers that are reflective of the student body, and are we retaining those teachers if we are? And what can we do differently? What can we do better to address the challenges? So no solutions from me on the stage today, but questions to help us think about the conversations that we're about to have as we engage in this summit. We know that between 19 and 30%, depending on what research you look at, of teachers leave the profession before their 5th year of teaching. But research says is that we can keep them beyond the 5th year, there's a chance that they'll stay a lot longer. So what can we do to help teachers get over that 5th year hump so that we can look long-term and keep them in the field? And as many as 16% of the teachers either move schools or leave the profession every year, right? And research shows that it's not really about the money. They're not leaving because of salary issues. Professional development is an issue. Administrative support is an issue. So what are things that our Noyce projects, what are things that others in the teacher education community can be doing to address these kinds of challenges? And lastly, the graph that I'm not sure if you can see well or not on the screen is Department of Education data that shows really what we know intuitively, that shows disciplinary areas where there are large teacher shortages. And of course, at the National Science Foundation, we're very interested in the STEM disciplinaries, and look at what's at the top. It's the mathematics, it's the computer science, it's all the sciences. And you can look at those very large percentages of teacher shortages within those respective disciplines. So just food for thought as we move forward throughout the summit. But I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to say, I know many of you are doing great work in your respective Noyce projects and in your respective teacher education programs at your institution to address some of these challenges. And we just want to make sure that that information, that research, that data is disseminated more broadly so that as a nation we can kind of move this needle on the STEM retention issue. And so I'm certainly very grateful for the work that you all do in both your Noyce programs and in general STEM teacher education. And I just want to commend you on the work that you're doing because we see the fruits. I love it when we're at meetings like this and you bring the Noyce scholars and fellows up and introduce them to the NSF staff. It's so rewarding to actually see the face of these folks who you write about in your annual reports, for example. So thank you for the work you do. Thank you for coming to the summit with an open mind, but coming to the summit as well with experiences that we all can share to make the work that we're individually doing come together to make a bigger impact. So I wish you a very successful summit experience. Please make sure you give us your feedback and engage in the summit because that's how we'll all make sure that it's a great summit through engagement. So thank you all again for being here. So I will introduce our plenary speaker for tonight. I've heard great things about Dr. Orange. Several of our NSF staff have heard her speak, and so we're just delighted to have her with us this evening. I think you're in for a great treat. So Dr. Tonikiaa Orange is the director for the Institute for Cultural Sustainability and Educational Equity, and the assistant director for the Principal Leadership Institute at the UCLA Center X. And I will leave it at that, and I'm certain that she is going to share much more about her experience and expertise with you in her remarks. And let's please welcome Dr. Orange to the stage.
No need to clap because I haven't said anything or done anything yet. But thank you, yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. I am excited to be here. I have a lot of nervous energy right now because when I look at the program, I kept saying, oh my gosh, my flight leaves at such and such time, but I want to go to this. Now I need to go to there. Now I need to go there. So like I have all this pent up like energy that's like pushing me right now. So it might come out when I speak to you today. I am the director for the Institute for Cultural Sustainability and Educational Equity. It is a long name that I'm going to change. Everyone keeps saying, why did you name it that? And I named it that because to me, the words matter and what we, call things, I mean, it matters because it embodied really what we were trying to do. I'm fortunate enough to work at UCLA Center X, and we decided that besides our pledge, of course, towards equity, like everyone is, it's all about equity, but we also decided that not only do we want to focus on, of course, being culturally relevant and culturally responsive, we also want to think about what does it mean to be culturally sustaining. How do we sustain the cultures of the students that were coming into our school through our teacher ed programs and our principal leadership programs, and how do we help them translate that into their own classrooms to sustain the culture of the students that they were teaching. And so we decided that this is really what we would kind of recruit our students, especially our math and science teachers. We had a big cohort of them over the past 10 years. And how do we recruit them grounded in the lens would be looking at what they do through the lens of being cultural and sustaining culturally who students are. So this is really how we thought about it. So all of our classes, all of our work is centered through this lens. I think before I even talk about a little bit more about how that has helped us retain our teachers in science and math and our STEAM teachers, and how it has actually even helped us recruit them, because it is grounded in cultural sustainability, that it's important for you to know actually who's sitting up in front of you on the stage. Besides all the things that you might read about being the director of this and that and all that other kind of stuff, and teacher and all that good stuff, the real part of who I am is the deep part of my culture that you don't see every day, but it's the part that drives my belief systems around teaching and learning and education in general. And that is that I'm a mother, a wife, and I'm a Midwesterner. I am not from Los Angeles, California. And that is evident when I make fun of everybody who is from Los Angeles for wearing earmuffs and big jackets at 60-degree weather. I don't get it, I don't get it, I don't get it. So, I speak African American language all day, every day. I'm proud of it. I am multilingual because I do speak African American language. I come from a culture that believes you do not get respect because of what you've accomplished in life. You get respect because you've earned it off of your actions and your deeds and what you say. I also am very protective of men of color, particularly African American men. It triggers me when certain things happen, and when I look on TV and I see certain things, or even when I see numbers about what's happening within the STEM and STEAM and the STEAM field, it triggers me. And so it drives the work that I do, and I'm unapologetic for that. I'm a contextualized learner and speaker. Everything is about a story, and that's how I make sense of the world, and that's how I actually teach at UCLA. And I believe that education is an oppressive system. But as my colleague Pedro Noguera would say, it's the only system we got. So, because of that, our goal, we think, is at UCLA, and I'm sure in the other teacher ed programs, is to make sure that we are helping produce educators that not only are just great STEM, teachers, but those educators who understand how to critique the dominant norms of schooling that have been oppressive to those that are marginalized the most. And so that is really why we really ground our work in the notions of cultural sustainability. So these are my daughters. They are twins, and they are 14 going on 34. I love them, but I sure as hell do not like them sometimes, let me tell you. So before I came, I just walked into their room and I just asked them, these are like typical questions that you ask anybody. And when I travel and I go into classrooms, I ask these same questions before I do a demo lesson at schools. And so it's like, name a scientist. Of course, they couldn't name anything. Albert Einstein, I think one of them said that. So of course, they didn't know any women scientists. I said, our doctors consider scientists. I asked them this question because both of them swear that they want to be plastic surgeons and start a business together. They do live in LA, so that's not surprising. It's not surprising, right? And then I asked them last to name a science class that they really enjoyed. They told me, no, doctors aren't scientists, they told me. And then they couldn't name a science class that they really enjoyed. Mind you, they are getting they're complacent and compliant in school, so that means that they're doing well. Because if you're complacent and compliant, you know how to do school well, and they're straight A students, and the teachers love them. They just hate school, right? So, but the biggest thing I asked them last was, where have you seen yourself in science classroom? This is the question that I always ask my graduate students when they come in. Where do students see themselves? I even ask them that when they come onto UCLA's campus. It is a big deal. Where do you see yourselves inside of this classroom? My daughters couldn't answer that question. Part of it is because they don't see themselves, because if you did, you would be able to answer that question. And just ironically, before I came downstairs, my girls called me there at a camp. And I said, how was camp today? And they said, Mom, I don't want to go back to camp anymore because we're the only 2 black girls in the class. And today there was a conversation about affirmative action. I don't even know how we got on that conversation. And someone stood up and said that the black students shouldn't get into schools because affirmative actions just let those folks who didn't do as well as others get into school. And so my response was, well, did you say anything? And they said, well, no, it wasn't the place to say anything, and but this is how I was feeling, and I'm uncomfortable. And I said, well, what did the teacher say? And and one of my daughters said, well, she didn't say anything. She just said, well, everybody has different opinions about things, all right? So we spent the next 30 minutes before I came down here. This is probably part of my pent-up energy also, because this stuff triggers me, right? This stuff triggers me. I want them to go be revolutionaries, and they're just so complacent and compliant. But so we spent the last like 30 minutes before I came downstairs talking about what happened in the classroom. Not about anything that the teacher probably wanted to talk about or do. It wasn't about content. It wasn't about the science and the math. It wasn't about the writing. It was about the context and the culture on how they felt when they were inside of this classroom, right? And so part of the thinking for us around how we wanted to center all of our teaching at UCLA was that you cannot talk about anything until you talk about the context and the social political context in which students live every single day. Everything else gets dismissed. Nothing my daughters talked about was about the content. It was all about how they felt and how they felt they were seen. And that's a big deal for me. It's a big deal. I think about how we talk about STEM and STEAM identity. What is STEM and STEAM identity for my daughters who happen to be women, who happen to be African American women? Those STEM identities are different. Every single one of them, and how do we cultivate that, right? And so it's important. So part of it for us is, how do we sustain who students culturally are? We always ask folks, do they see themselves inside any classroom? How do they feel? And we ask our teachers the same thing. Do you feel this way when you walk into your teacher ed programs? So we think about some of these. I try to ground students, you know, our STEM teachers to think about, we're just not talking about culturally, ethnic culture, we're talking about age culture, we're talking about religion culture, we're talking about sexual orientation culture, we're talking about various strands of culture and how that shows up and how folks see themselves when they walk inside of a classroom. And it's important for us to think about that. We know that usually when we ask students the questions about science and who they see, how do they see themselves or what a scientist does, usually our answer is Albert Einstein. And I don't know about you, but if I happen to live in Compton in Los Angeles, thinking about an older man with white hair does not inspire me to want to be a scientist at all. But these are the images, no matter where I go, from St. Louis or whatever, and when I ask students about where do they, can you name a scientist and what one looks like, this is usually the image that I get. I also think about what shapes students' understanding about what scientists should be and what shapes our own STEM teachers about what STEM teachers should be and what education should look like. And again, we get a lot of, you know, subliminal messages from where students are engaged and how and what they're looking at on a daily message without them even knowing. You know, the fact that my daughters can't name one, they go throughout their whole entire academic career not even thinking that that's a problem, because it has become just so normalized for them not to see themselves and not to know. And that's just not okay, right? So the question that we ground the work with our STEM teachers in is, again, where do students see themselves in your classrooms and in these fields? And are we questioning and problematizing the dominant beliefs and norms and policies of the school system that we sit in today? Are we questioning and problematizing it? Because if we do not question what we believe success looks like, what we believe engagement looks like, what we believe the content should be, what we believe communication style should be, we perpetuate the inequity ourselves. We have to question and problematize. So for us, all of our work with our STEM teachers is grounded in questioning and problematizing dominant cultural norms, identifying what those things are, and using that first and foremost as the guide to your classroom and to work in the most tough, hardest schools that are hardest to staff schools, and for you to stay there because you're always questioning and problematizing it, and you're always asking the question, where do students see themselves? We call it this is the way I call it in the classes. I always call it, we're making the invisible visible. Whenever I see our former STEM teachers, it's always like, are you making the invisible visible? Which means you cannot talk about content, you cannot talk about standards to me, you cannot talk about discipline or curriculum until you talk about the things that it sits on top. What it sits on top are all the things underneath. It's the bias, it's the racial inequality, it's culturally who students are and what they bring into classrooms and how it manifests itself in classroom. It's about how folks trust, how they build relational trust, because people trust very differently, right? It's about positionality. All of those things have to be discussed and be talked about first before we get into talk about discipline, before we talk about content, before we talk about standards. None of those things that sit on top are equity equalizers. It's only the people who are below, the people who institute all of it, it's their mindset and their own skill set to shift it. And if we don't have them call out what all those things sit on top, then again, we just perpetuate inequity consistently. So that is what it's grounded. We start all of our STEM, all of our teacher ed programs and our principal leadership programs. It is always through what is invisible. And then we move forward up, and then we talk about content, and then we talk about curriculum, and then we talk about policy and it's a thing. But it's always the lens that you see through teaching and learning is culturally first who you are, and you have to recognize that and know that that is what will propel itself, and that is what will show up inside classrooms, and it's important. Some of the ways we talk about this and how it manifests itself in classrooms and it manifests itself in our own teacher ed programs is just the way we think about how cultural norms just situate themselves. This is nothing new, of course. Most of you, a lot of you I know, do work around culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy, so this stuff is not new. But we do know that tone of voice, the ways folks communicate, the way people think about engagement, the way folks think about ideas, again, of respect, the way folks think about home language, like validating African American language is extremely important because my daughters speak it, I speak it, but often schools, if you speak African American or Mexican Chicano English, it is not looked upon as a smart language, even though it is rule governed and perfectly valid, and students intuit that exactly how they're supposed to be. Where is that validated inside all classrooms, inside our math and science classrooms? Where is it validated? We talk about productive talk in science classes often, and how does that manifest itself when you have students who have communication styles, and you have students in your own teacher ed programs who have communication styles, where it is overlap talk, where they talk over one another, because that's how in your community, that's how you're heard. How do we validate that in science classrooms, or do we, again, are they seen in it or are they not seen because we are going back with what dominant norms say schooling should be for folks inside of classrooms? So we really spent a lot of time thinking about that. What does it look like to have a classroom that is focused on communication or focused on collaborative work versus cooperative, because you come from a cultural background where collaboration is the foremost, and you come from a background where you're very sociocentric. But a school system's dominant norm is that you're not sociocentric, or if you're collaborative, you only talk in very rule-governed type of ways in a collaborative type of setting. So all of it is grounded in this, and we spent a lot of time talking about this. And again, the bottom line for our students, our STEAM students, was that if we walked into your classroom, where would those students in there see themselves? If you can't answer the question, then you haven't made the invisible visible for me. You have to be able to answer the question for us. And again, it always starts with your own experiences. So we spend a lot of time in which we have with our STEM teachers, again, talking about who are you culturally, how does it manifest itself in the way you think about education and learning, right? And how do you critique that? And then how do you understand and learn about the students who actually sit in your classroom? And not, again, just surface culture, but deep culture, the culture that you can't see every day, because that's the important piece of it. The quote that I like to use is a quote by Cornel West. He says, "It takes courage to look in the mirror and see past your reflection to who you really are when you take off the mask, when you're not performing the same old routines and social roles. It takes courage to ask, how did I become so well adjusted to injustice?" So the question I always ask folks is, how do we reproduce inequity every day in our own actions? So all of our teachers, when they go out and they start working in schools, and we go back and we meet with them again, it's just like, how are you reproducing inequity every single day in your own actions? Do you just go to school every day and follow the policies and norms because that's the way they've been for such a long time? Or are you shifting the way folks are supposed to think about science? Are you shifting the way conversations are supposed to be held inside of the classroom? Are you shifting the way instruction should look like, or how students are supposed to respond inside of that classroom? How do you disrupt it, and how do you critique what is being said about what should happen? How do you do that? For us, we know that once we started really making a shift of our classes to really focus on helping our STEAM teachers think about culturally who students are and how we sustain that, not only just through content, but through their instruction and making it a priority to sustain it, that we just had I don't know, all our evaluations were really great. I mean, they were good already, but they just skyrocketed once we really started making this kind of shift, because students really felt this hit them. This was the core. This is why they came to UCLA. You say you're equity, but oftentimes people don't feel it. They said they felt it. And so if you look at some of the numbers, this, for us, is just very important for us, that all of our students are STEM teachers. Over the 10 years that we've done our residency program with our STEAM folks, that this is what our demographics look like. Now, we could break this down even more, but I didn't have time to do that. But we have over 60% are students of color and 40% are Caucasian. That's important for us, and it's intentional that way. That if we really ourselves at an institution say that we are geared towards equity and helping critique, we need the folks who need to critique the system in the system to do it and be at the forefront of it. So we purposefully make sure that this is who we're serving and who we're recruiting. And they come because they're expecting that we're going to start with what is invisible and help make that visible and help give them some tools to make that visible when they go into their science and math classrooms. The next thing is that where our students are located. It's intentional that if you leave us, that you are going to go and work in the hardest to serve schools. And so we have, again, over 70% of our students over the 10 years are working in the most hardest to serve schools in Los Angeles. And really, it's over 95% of 54%. There's 95% lower socioeconomic status is where they're working. So our students are sticking it out, and they are staying. And again, asking the question, how do we make that invisible visible? And how are we not reproducing inequity every day and critiquing the dominant norms of what schools say science and math should actually look like? The other thing is how are our folks still staying in school, in teaching, in the field? And so we have 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And after 6 years, we have a retention rate. We still have 94% of our teachers that we've educated still in the field teaching. It's because it's not an easy job, and it's tough. We've done a great job of being able to work with, like, Los Angeles Unified School District, of trying to continue to provide support even after they go into the field. So we just don't turn them over back to the district, but we also just work with the district to continue the support, because again, our thinking sometimes is not aligned with the district's thinking. And we want to make sure it's a smooth transition, but we're really proud of that number, and we want to, and it gets harder and harder every year to do. But again, if we're intentional about what we want, then that's the work that we have to do, and we have to keep going out there and doing that. For us, it is the context, it's the culture, it's socio-political context, and then it's the content. And this is how we structure our program. That context matters, that culture matters, that the social political context in which students live and in which our own teachers work every day matter, and then the content comes behind that. Because if you don't get the other three, it doesn't make a difference who stands in front of them and what you're trying to teach, it's gone. My daughters didn't think about anything today. The content was gone. They only thought about the social political things that was happening in the context of their classroom, and it was sad because the teacher just didn't know how to handle it, right? And so my own daughters were left out. They just felt uncomfortable in that space. But then you just go and you just keep teaching. It's just not the way to go. It's not what we should be doing. It's not what I expect from my own kids. Some of our students, how it manifests itself in the field. This is from one of our students. His name is Vin. I'm just going to read, if I can, because I don't have my glasses, just a short little excerpts from his inquiry project that he did, and one of the things he did in the school when he got to it. He said, this inquiry project aims at providing an opportunity for students studying high school physiology to explore the issues around colorism and how it has been normalized by media and the digital application Snapchat. Now, what he found in his classroom when he went was issues around colorism between the African American students and between our Central American students, because there were issues, of course, in the Central American community about being lighter skin or darker skin. It was coming up in class quite often. Not only was that was coming up in class, the N-word was coming up quite often. The N-word was being used by the African American students and being used by the Central American students in class with one another as a joking, and to the other African American students. He knew early on, just going in to teach science was not going to work. That he had to find a way to address it. And again, for us is, How do you figure this out? How do you make the invisible visible? And how do you really talk about the issues that are really, you know, like the reality for those students at that time? And so this is his way of kind of bringing that in. This is what else he said. I believe our stories and experiences are connected. Audre Lorde's word here, he said, he had a quote above, reminds me of the ways identities interlocked and complicate individual personhood. The scholar Kimberly Crenshaw calls this intersectionality, and as an educator, I believe I must begin my teaching with a nuanced examination on the identities and shared struggles within my classroom. By moving with an understanding of my own privilege, power, and positionality, I may enact a classroom rooted in practices that celebrate identities and build on students' inherent funds of knowledge rather than erase them. This is my guiding vision as an educator working with urban youth. In reflecting on identity and positionality, my identities as a cis man, able-bodied, first-generation, Vietnamese immigrant has informed the way in which I navigate the world. And he goes on again to talk about his own self and how who he was before he actually came to our program impacted the way he thought about teaching math and science. And it has shifted the way he went into his classroom now to work, always, again, making the invisible visible. And this is important for us because we had a lot of students in our program that issues around not only just race and various cultures, but issues around serving students with disabilities. You know, we would always ask our folks in the audience, our teachers, when's the last time you walked into a classroom where someone had a book where the protagonist was somebody who had someone with special needs? We looked at students, of course, in the LGBTQ community and how they were disproportionately not represented in what was taking place in the fields of science, and they felt left out. And so all of these things are the things that we kind of root our program in, and we need to start at that base level. So right here I have that the longer you swim in a culture, the more invisible it becomes. Again, this just goes back to say that back to Cornel West, if we continue every day with our own actions and not question anything, and we stay in the culture of what schools say it's supposed to be, we continue that inequity. We just continue to reproduce it. And part of what we have to do is remember that we have to critique what dominant norms say about what schooling looks like, what success looks like, what engagement looks like, and which cultures are validated and affirmed in our instruction and what we do every single day. And the quote I leave you with is Malcolm X, my favorite. The greatest mistake of the movement has been trying to organize a sleeping people around specific goals. You have to wake the people up first, then you'll get action. And for us, we could not send students out and just talk about curriculum and the regular things about methods without having them first be woke about what students were experiencing in classroom every single day. And that should be the guiding force on how you think about discipline, how you think about curriculum, how you think about science education. That should drive you, not the content and not the methods. That comes afterwards. So people have to be woke. And so the hope is then that we continue to think about how we can wake folks up in our own institutions and continue to wake up our STEM teachers. And the more woke they become, the more they can push back and start critiquing those dominant norms. And hopefully the retention will just keep going because people will know that they can fight and they just keep pushing on and making the invisible visible. So that's it. Thank you. Did I make it on time? Yeah. I don't know if anybody has any questions because I know they gave me a time frame, and I think I did pretty good. Didn't I? Okay, that's what I said. I tried to look at the clock down there, but it was in military hours, and I couldn't think that quick in my head. I couldn't think. Got confused. So, but I don't know if anybody has anything they want to ask me, or please do. I don't know if I can answer it because I don't have all the answers either, but yes. Yes.
I have a comment, and actually it's funny, I always get more nervous asking questions and giving talks, but my name is David Hammer, I'm from Tufts University, and I want to try to say something that I don't know if I can capture really quickly. You keep saying not content and not methods, and not curriculum until these other things, and I totally endorse everything you said except that part. The way that we think about content is something that might be an invisible feature of this culture, we think of content as the body of correct information that we should put into students' heads. And if we think about what the doing and knowing of science and mathematics and engineering is, that's really an anemic sense of what it is we're trying to teach. So here's maybe a quick way of saying how it intersects. If I think of scientists as professional learners, that's what they do for a living. Mathematicians, engineers, what they do for a living is they put themselves into situations where they don't understand what's happening and they grapple with it. So if we're teaching STEM, we're teaching learning. And the things students bring from their lives, the knowledge they have of the physical world, the mathematical world, the ways they have of forming knowledge for themselves, those are all productive resources that need to have a place in how we conceptualize content. So I'm encouraging you not to say not content and not curriculum and not methods, because the way we construct those in the classroom is part of how we let students have an identity as learners.
I completely agree with every single thing you said, so hoorah, I do. My counter story to that is that math and science to me is bias, and that what content is presented depends on who's presenting it. It depends on your frame of reference. And so of course, it's the knowledge that students bring in, but if my science teachers do not understand colorism within the Latinx community, if they do not understand the history of racism and why my daughters feel uncomfortable sitting in a classroom where science is being taught, then it doesn't make a difference what the science teacher is trying to get across, because they've already lost them. So the goal is, first, to me, you have to be aware of who sits in front of you. If you do not understand, this is a small example, I'll never forget, there was a student who walked in, and her hair was half braided, and the other half was not braided. And the policy at the school was to no hoodies, but the student wore the hoodie in the classroom. Everyone's up in arms because it could be no hoodies. If you do not understand the history of African American women and their hair, then of course it will be a policy that you interjected. So they expected that student just to go into class, would have her hair braided and not braided, and learn whatever it is they were teaching. So we had to first get them and say, it's a big deal. If you don't understand about hair and African American women and the culture of it, it doesn't make any difference what content you're trying to teach. You've already lost her, right? And so I agree with that. I'm just saying there's a step before that so that we can make sure we get the right content inside the classroom. And so that my daughters can actually see themselves as not only scientists, but see themselves as African American women scientists, because they're two different things. Those are different things. But I agree with that. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. My name is Rachel Dominguez. I'm a physics professor at Randolph-Macon College. I appreciate that you have this holistic sort of mission that you're giving to us. And as I reflect on that, and I think about the small, southern, mostly white institution that I'm in, it seems pretty far removed. And I'm wondering if, I don't want to ask you to reduce what you're doing, but if you could perhaps exemplify your message in something that teachers can take away, like an activity. So on the first day of my introductory physics class, I usually have some sort of reflection that I do with students. Tell me something that there was a study of introductory physics classrooms, and they just asked them to express something that they're good at that has nothing to do with physics. And it's just any activity that doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the content that we talked about. So could you give me a question or an activity or something that if I'm just going to inject one little thing into a classroom of adults to get at this idea of making the invisible visible, what would that be?
Well, I'll give you two things. One of the things that I sometimes start class off with is sort of like trying to ground them in the type of learning theory that we believe culturally responsiveness, culturally sustaining pedagogy comes from, which is the social cultural learning theory, right? That we believe this is how students learn. So I have all of these things on the wall. It could be like, I don't know, a vacation, a trip, music, dancing, food, or wherever. And the goal is we have them go to whatever, if they had all the money in the world and they wanted to go someplace or do something, where would you go? Go to it, and then everybody has to say what you contribute on the trip. And then we finish doing that. People just go to what they like. Part of the point was before we get to start to talk about some of the things we want to talk about, we want everyone to realize that everybody brings something to the table. It doesn't make a difference who it is. And that doing this is a way we think about social cultural learning. And so that we're sitting in a space and everybody is a co-constructor of knowledge and everybody brings something to the table. And so they sit there and say, well, I'll bring luggage. Well, I'm a great planner, so I'll bring the plan. Oh, I'm the dancer, so I'll teach you how to salsa dance. So they get around in that group and they do that. And that's one of the ways that we kind of break them up to say, this is what we talk about when we're talking about social cultural learning theory. It's just a beginning base. Another thing that I also do is to talk to them strictly about understanding, can you identify who you are racially and culturally? Because I try to get students away. When I first want them to think about culture, I try to get them to understand that they don't understand the difference between culture and race, so they're confused when they walk inside of a classroom on how to deal with it. And so I just ask them, who are you ethnic, racially? How do you identify yourself and a behavior associated with it? This is not something I created. This is another colleague of mine did. Who are you racially and a behavior? Who are you ethnically and a behavior, and who are you nationally and a behavior? And you will find that students are often stumped, as are many of the professors that I work with, because we actually don't know who we are. And then from there, you can realize that race, you can have a whole conversation about that there's no behavior associated with it, but we often associate a behavior with race. This is why we always say, well, I wish all the black boys in the corner would stop talking, right? Because we're associating culture, race with the behavior, and there is none. And then we can start to break away and say, no, culturally who we are is dynamic, and we can move in and out of culture. And so then then we start to kind of talk to students about, then now we can look at what cultural norms are because we can shift. And so those are two things. But I'll have a lot of stuff, so I can come see me. Or I'll find you, because I'm going to presentation, so I'm going to look.
Hi, I'm Anthony. I'm from USC. I was actually just going to...
Wait, South Carolina or USC, California?
USC, California.
Get out of here. Next.
I promise I'm legitimate, I swear.
Well, I love the Trojans.
Thank you. What I was going to say was autoethnography. So how you and your ethnicity fit into the larger piece of society is one thing that I did with my kids last year. I'm a first year. So actually, I'm student teaching, so next year would be my first year teaching. But that's something I did with my last class, and it worked really great. So I just wanted to say, for anybody listening, autoethnography, great stuff. Yeah.
Okay, great. I better learn a little bit about it.
Hi, I'm Lakeisha McClary from the George Washington University here in DC. And I want to change gears a little bit. You mentioned something, I appreciated your talk, it really resonated with me, but you mentioned about how you're working with your school system to more seamlessly integrate your scholars into that. And as we train teachers with these kinds of different mindsets from the dominant culture. So how can you say a little bit more about how you're working with the school system to be a little bit more, I don't know, open about what they're doing so that the scholars and other teachers like your training can be successful in the classroom?
It was a long process. It was tough.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. It was hard. Because I mean, it's a system entrenched in test scores and all of a sudden creating a new intervention program for the same group that we've been talking about since before we were all born. I mean, you know, it was entrenched in that. So it was consistently having meetings with them, trying to get our message. I did presentations around the way we think about supporting teachers. And finally, when they started to interview our teachers to come in, all of their mentors said, there's something different about this group right here. And then they started to see. So it took, but over 10 years, I don't think we got to that point until about the 5th year. That's how long it took. But it was just consistently sitting down at a table, trying to get them to understand what we were trying to see. And then eventually for them, it was actually seeing that the students looked different to them. The way they taught was different, you know, that's what they saw that was different and started to change their mind. And then they were asking us all the time, like, oh, we have to combine, we should do this. And they don't have to come and do our training program now. They can just continue to do yours and we'll just hand it off. And they don't need to do another inquiry project for the support system because they just did a master's with you all, so why would they have to repeat it? Yeah. And before they used to make them repeat a lot of things that they had already did in school. Yeah. You know, so it's just a lot of talk and work.
Thank you.
And time. Nothing's overnight.
Hello, my name is Jane Horowitz, and I direct the Science Outreach Initiative at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And my work has kind of moved away from teacher preparation, teacher education, but I want to tell a very brief story to see what your reaction is, because it happened to me today, and I also really focus on stories. I woke up this morning to my phone ringing. It was the parent of a student who had been in a program that I coordinate in July, which is to place underrepresented minority young women who are high school students in science labs in our School of Arts and Sciences. And part of this has to do with the fact that we are trying very hard and very concretely to change the complexion of our faculty and our graduate students, and we feel that this is really an important way to start that process. So the mother called. This student that I worked with is homeschooled, and the mother was upset because the student had gone on to another program that we placed her in this summer, and they were about to do DNA swabbing in this particular lab experience. And the mother's concern was, what were they going to do with the DNA, given the history of DNA misuse in the African American community? And I've been reflecting on this all day today because I really understood what she was saying, and I gave her the information about the program coordinator so she could make the contact and express her concern. But I gave her advice, which was basically, don't be so upset, don't be so upset. And I really feel that that was the wrong thing to say, because I understand where this comes from, but I'm also concerned that as mothers, we sometimes foist our own agitation on our children, and I don't quite know how to deal with that either. So I just wanted to share that story because it really resonated with your words today, and thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, my initial thought is, of course she will be upset. And it, like you said, it is very logical for her to think that way. And the fact that you understood that she thought that way is extremely important. And for us, oftentimes, we do trivialize it, and we'll just say, don't worry about it, it's okay. But there is some deep-rooted history on why people are afraid. James Baldwin always said to be black and aware in America is to be paranoid. You know, you get more paranoid as you just start to learn more and to see everything that's happening and going on, right? And so people who are marginalized continuously feel, you know, they get paranoid about things because of the history in which it was. So I don't know, I guess my thought was I would never push someone to do it, and I guess the more, I always think about relational trust. The more relational trust I build with her, and the more she trusted me, then the more she would let me, you know, kind of guide her student into whatever I thought was right. But it takes time. We do a lot of work on relational trust. We always say there's no right way to do it, but you have to invest in it. And every day as a leader, you have to think about how are you building relational trust. It should be the first question you think about with your educators, your students, with your parents, and your family, is how do you build it? And that takes time as well because of the history in this country. Yeah. Are we done?
Hi, my name is Earlene Brazil. I'm a pre-service teacher at New Jersey City University in New Jersey. You mentioned the experience that your daughters had in their classroom and how they were uncomfortable with the conversation concerning affirmative action and how you were disappointed in how the teacher handled it. How would you have handled it? I'm curious to know, because sometimes as educators you're fearful of how far you should go with a subject with children. So I just wanted to know, if you were a teacher in that classroom, you were not a mother at that moment, how would you have handled it?
That would be hard. It would be hard. All my biases come out. It just shoots right in everything I do. Being very aware that some people might feel comfortable. I mean, many of the students might feel comfortable about the topic because it's one, especially the way the one student kind of presented it and kind of just shouted out talking about it. I would have probably done some quiet writing about it. I wouldn't have dismissed it, because I think as soon as you dismiss something like that, then you condone the fact that it should be dismissed. And so and that's not the reality that any of the students that are in that classroom feel. So I will probably end up saying, you know what, this is a time we need, I'm curious, how do folks feel about what was just said? Let's do like a quick write and do it that way. And then I would either say we're going to do it privately just for you to write down. I might say we can share it with one another if you feel comfortable. We might do some anonymous share to see where people feel, where folks feel. And then I will look at the responses or figure out then, after I have a feel for the room, how far the next step will be for me to go to talk about it. Because I honestly believe that other folks in that classroom had a voice. Whether they agreed with it or disagreed wasn't really the point. The point was that students who typically feel marginalized in classrooms don't speak up even though they have something to say. And so the question is, even if their voice wasn't heard vocally, then how do I support students' voices even if it's not the traditional way to speak, which is orally, so they could write it? I would have folks come see me after school and I would talk to them probably individually and say, how'd you feel about today? What's going through your mind? I would always try to find some venue for them to kind of be able to say something, speak, and then that would help guide where my next conversation would go. But I wouldn't have dropped it. I wouldn't just leave it, because it says it's invisible, and it's not.
So we have time for one more burning question.
So I have a question. Somebody can answer it for me. How about that? So I'm always stuck in between this, again, I get passionate about things. So when my daughters told me this today, my initial reaction is, you should have stood up and said something. You have to say something. But of course, stepping back, it is, you don't have to be the spokesperson all the time for everybody in the classroom because you're the only two that are in the room. Right? I don't want them to feel that way. But then I have the dichotomy of also saying, but if you don't say it, then nobody else will. So it's all these extra burden, that they have on it. So I told them I would call them back after I finished speaking. So what should I tell them? I don't know. What should they do tomorrow when they walk into that space? One says she doesn't want to go back. The other one says she does. I already paid money, so they have to go. So that's not an issue. They've got to go. So they're waiting to say, okay, so what should we do? Should we say something to the teacher? Should we just go speak out? Should we not say anything? Because I don't feel like, what should be my advice to them? Maybe that's it. Be them, right? It is what it is. You go in and you do what you feel like you have to do at that point in time. Okay, all right, great, thanks.